Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to thank you so much for coming out. Today we have Gail Petrosky. She is with the Moraine chapter of the Ice Age Trail. She's a volunteer coordinator. And this morning we heard from Melanie McManus about her book, The Thousand Miler. So what a wonderful partnership that we can bring these two together to share about this important asset that's in our backyard. A lot of times we take for granted these wonderful things that we have, but when you move away, you're like, oh my goodness, we had the Ice Age Trail in our backyard. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Gail and share her wonderful opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. As she said, my name is Gail Petrosky, and I am a volunteer. I am the chapter coordinator for the Central Moraines chapter of the Ice Age Trail Alliance, and we'll talk a little bit more about those chapters in just a bit. First of all, we'll give a very quick introduction to the Ice Age Trail. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I think Melanie did a really great job this morning, and at the end of a long day, I'd rather talk about new things to you instead of repeating what she said. So it's the 1,000-mile foot path across Wisconsin, and as we go through, we'll talk not only about the Ice Age Trail, but the Ice Age Trail Alliance, which is the volunteer organization that does a lot of the in-the-ground work. A little bit about the local chapter, the local trails, a couple of the programs that the Ice Age Trail does, including the Saunters program, some of the future plans area, and some of the ways that we can always accept and welcome support. It all started with the Ice Age. The snow accumulated faster than it melted, made the thick ice, made the glaciers. This is probably a glacier from somewhere else, but you can see all the dirt on top of it. And then 20,000 years ago, it was across the northern part of North America, as in the image there. And the lobes of the glaciation came down across Wisconsin. You can see one area kind of in the middle here that was glaciated in an earlier part of the Ice Age, and we actually are in that area here in Wausau. These other lobes came down, and they kind of were shaped by the underlying bedrock, the Keweenaw Peninsula, the Niagara Escarpment, and the underlying geology directed to a large extent where that ice came. And our landscape, our wonderful pothole lakes, the hills of northern Wisconsin up in Lincoln and Lang Lake County are gifts of the glacier. This morning, Melody mentioned the Driftless area, and that is an area that is a very, very different landscape because it was influenced by the glacier, by the meltwater, and the things that happened after the glacier, but the glacier itself never scoured, never scrubbed that land, and so it's very different. But here you can see the little creeks up in Rusk County, the flatlands. This could be an example of over in the Antiglo Flats, the Door Peninsula where the bedrock is exposed. And some of the particular features, those world-class features that Melanie talked about, are things like drumlins. They're cigar-shaped hills, and they're especially common down in the Madison area, in the Kettle Moraine, near Campbellsport, areas like that. The Kames, the conical hills, and the best way to describe those is water coming down through the ice. If you think of a grain elevator or a sand elevator and all this dirt coming down and forming this hill, and that's what a Kame is. Or eskers, she talked about the stuff in the bottom of the rivers under the glaciers. We do not have any in this particular area. There are a number of them down in the Kettle Moraine. There are some nice ones up in Taylor County. There's a big esker by the Mondo Flowage. There are some really nice ones in Polk County in the Straight Lake area. Erratics, those large boulders that you see all over, and they were carried by the ice. The technical definition of an erratic is that it is different than the underlying bedrock. And they are used often to see where the glacier may have come from. Kettles are pothole lakes, where a big chunk of ice got buried by the dirt. The ice melted away, but the dirt protected this front chunk, and so it all leveled out. And then eventually, many, many years later, that chunk of ice eventually melted out, and it made these big holes, these kettles. That's what most of the lakes in northern Wisconsin are made from kettles, from chunks of ice. And the seeds of the Ice Age National Scenic Trail were when people recognized how really unique and world-class these features were. In 1926, they saved 800 acres in the Kettle Moraine, and they established the forest there, and they had a glacial hiking trail down there. And then in the 50s, Ray Zillmer, who you heard about this morning, envisioned this linear park. And in 1958, he founded the Ice Age National Park and Trail Foundation, which was a predecessor. The Ice Age Trail Alliance is actually the same organization with a new name. He also met with Henry Royce, who was a congressman from Milwaukee at that time. Henry Royce and Warren Knowles had a lot to do with establishing what was initially the Ice Age National Scenic Preserves, and then eventually also became the National Scenic Trail. Some parts of those preserves are in the western part of that bifurcation, and other parts are in the eastern part. It is, like she said, just one of 11 National Scenic Trails. It has been a National Scenic Trail since 1980, so it's been one of the original ones for a while. And the route of the trail makes it easily accessible to people from throughout Wisconsin. As she said this morning, 60% of the people who live in Wisconsin are within 20 miles of the trail. Probably the people who are the furthest from the trail are in the La Crosse area, in the western part of the Driftless area, because the Ice Age Trail does not go through the Driftless area, but it goes through the glacial edges. And the Ice Age Trail website, as she said, has wonderful, wonderful resources if you want to explore it. The website I have listed there, I also have it listed on the handouts that I have out in back. They have recommended hikes. They have itineraries where they will give you a suggested hike if you want to go backpacking for a few days. They will give you a suggested hike in a specific area for a day hike. Or they will give you a suggested weekend family vacation that is kid-friendly. So they have a number of different ways that you can go out and enjoy the trail. They also have maps and a guidebook. I have a sample of the guidebook out there. My local maps took maps from their binder full of maps for the entire trail, including the road connectors. And they have a smartphone app, as she told you. And we also have a Facebook group. Many people don't care to go on Facebook, but if you do, there is a page there that is strictly people who are hiking the trail. So they share hints and help each other to make hiking the trail easier. And now we'll go on to the Ice Age Trail Alliance, the volunteer organization that brings together the other organizations. The mission of the Alliance is to create, support, and protect this 1,000-mile footpath. And it traces the formations across Wisconsin, the National Scenic Trail. The Triad is the original groups that the Ice Age Trail was supported by: the Ice Age Trail Alliance, the National Park Service, and the Wisconsin DNR. Over time, the roles of the DNR and the National Park Service have been gradually diminishing, especially from the point of view of funding. But they still involve a lot of regulations, a lot of hoops we have to jump through because we have to meet their standards consistently. We also partner with businesses, cities, towns, etc., and service groups. Lots of groups that will put together volunteers for us, that will promote us, things like that. And a new initiative in the last few years is something called Trail Communities, where there is a more formal partnership between the Ice Age Trail and communities that it passes through or near, and to improve the ability of the trail to move on. Some of the early communities are listed here. We have not made an effort in that direction yet in this area, and part of that has to do with the volunteer support and energy to get it going. The other things that the Ice Age Trail has going for it is that it is an accredited land trust. In 2018, there were More than 2,500 volunteers came out and supported the trail in one way or another, putting in more than 82,000 hours of volunteer time in support of the trail. And the Alliance volunteers, and the Alliance staff consistently win national awards for the National Park Service. Some of the top awards for volunteers have come to Ice Age Trail Alliance volunteers. Some of the top staff awards have come to Ice Age Trail staff. So that speaks to the quality of the organization. I said we're an accredited land trust. This is a big deal. We got it just a few years ago. We have to renew it every 3 years. And what this means that we as an organization have the management, the ethics, and the support to when we acquire lands, we can support it and keep it in perpetuity. And it's becoming more and more necessary for the Alliance to make targeted land purchases for places to put the trail because of the reduced funding that is available through partnerships, especially our state and federal partners. And so we as an Alliance frequently have to find private funding to do those kinds of things. Local chapters. This list starts with the St. Croix area. It works its way through to the eastern part. There's 21 of them. We are the Central Moraines chapter. Our focus is primarily Marathon County. We were called the Marathon County chapter for a long time. We're originally the Plover River chapter because that's where the Plover River goes through. And then, I don't know when, they changed it to Marathon County chapter. And recently we decided that we want to extend our outreach. So much of our trail goes through the eastern part of the county where we are as close to places like Wittenberg, Shawano, Anawa as we are to Wausau. And so we want to be more inclusive. And it has been helping us. We have now become to get support from Newskies and other organizations that are outside of Marathon County, and we didn't want to be slapping them in the face with saying, support us, but we're Marathon County. So we are much more inclusive, even though it doesn't specifically say Marathon County in our name anymore. In central Wisconsin, our chapter was formed in the 1970s, and the first 6 miles of trail built were the Ringel segment in the 70s. And at that time, much of the trail was taking any existing road or pathway that we could get access to. So a lot of that trail went on old logging or resource extraction routes. A lot of it overlapped with the snowmobile trail out there, and it still does. And we'll talk about that more in just a little bit. In 2013, volunteers spent 6 different projects plus a work day with 50 National Guard to build what is known as the Plover River segment. I know some of you have walked it, others of you may not. Last spring, Backpacker Magazine, which is a pretty cool magazine for hikers, talked about the top 50 miles of those 17,000 miles of National Scenic Trail that Melanie talked about this morning. One of those 50 miles was on the Plover River segment. It happens to be a segment that is not super easy to walk, but it goes right along this trout stream. You're actually root and rock hopping, and you can feel the gurgling water all winter long, and it's really cool. And it's right here in Marathon County, and it was built by volunteers. I think that's pretty cool. We also had started a new project 2 years ago. In 2017, we constructed 1.7 miles of new trail by the landfill that comes off of the Mountain Bay Trail between Hatley and Ringel. This was an opportunity to open up the area that had been logging roads and multi-use for other uses. There are mountain bike trails being built over there, and we built on the other side of the landfill where we had a much more pleasant hiking experience. We got trail dedicated to us, and we are continuing to build north from there to continue to get rid of the user conflicts and create much better interpretation, much better hiking experience in the next few months. Here we're showing some pictures of building trail. This is a bridge that we are building. They're bringing across a stringer. You can see we've got some claws there that we're using to drag it. And here, these are building boardwalks. Some of you have walked the boardwalk north of Highway 52 on the Plover River segment. We build all of our boardwalks in frames. You can see these 8-foot sections there, and then we put the decking on them. That makes repair much easier. In fact, when we built this Plover River segment, we had no more than opened it up, and within a month, a tornado came through. A big tree came down right across it, split one of the sections of boardwalk in half. Well, we went out, we removed the tree, and we were able to take the decking off, put on 3 new of the long boards, and put the decking back on. Since they're floating frames, it didn't break anything else. We were able to shove it back in place and get it repaired quite quickly. You will also notice down here, you can see a little kind of a metal down there. We have used something called floating plans that are like snowshoes, so that instead of having our pylons going down into the swamps, so that with the freeze and thaw cycle, you start getting boardwalks that used to go like this, and suddenly they're like this. And by using those floating pans, it keeps our boardwalk much more level, maintains it much longer. Some more people working on trail, volunteers. These are at the larger mobile skills projects I talked about. And they're not afraid to get dirty, as you can see. We have tools here. We have some industrial-sized rakes, a lot of hand tools. We start by scraping the ground, getting rid of the foliage, and then shaping it. And we also do land stewardship. We work to get rid of invasives and to keep it being opening up around oak trees so you can see the view shed instead of having it all clogged with buckthorn and things like that. And that is especially done in the southern part of the state where some of those things are a bigger deal. And when we have these larger projects, we travel on our stomach. We have volunteers who come out and prepare meals for us, so that when we have a mobile skills project, they give us a place to camp if you choose to camp. You can commute. They make a hot breakfast for you in the morning. They pack you a lunch to eat in the field. And they also give you a hot dinner in the evening. And the cooks do that. They have actually a full certified kitchen trailer that they keep in a trailer, and it travels from spot to spot under a tent. And Thelma here, gal in the middle, is in her 80s. A couple years ago, she got the Herzog Award for the top volunteer in the entire National Park Service for the work that she does. Local trails. The route of the Ice Age Trail through Marathon County starts up at Double H on the Shawano line, comes through the Plover River segment, walks a little bit of a road, comes through Eau Claire Dells, comes through a little bit more of a road through some swampy area, then comes down to Ringgold, Hatley, the area that we're working on right now, and then it continues along on county roads to the county line. So you can see there's quite a bit of area where we still need to build trail here in Marathon County, and that involves federal government, National Park Service determining corridor, getting right to cross property, which can be tricky, especially in some areas. This part down here comes fairly close to the where the Posse Comitatus was back in the 70s, Tigerton Dells, and so we have quite a few different types of people that we have to work with. It takes many years to build the relationships to get access to the trail property, and that's one of the roadblocks for getting the whole trail completed, if you will say. We currently have 4 off-road segments. The Plover River segment that I mentioned, let's see if I can do this. Up here, this was built between 2010 and 2013. And it's 5.7 miles, and it has dramatic terminal range. It actually has a switchback so that when the leaves are off, if you're hiking on it, you're walking on the top of this hill, and if you look off to one side, you see the flat out there, the beginning of the Antigo Flats, which is a glacial feature where the dirt piled up and then where it was all washed out because of the water running off. And we have stepping stones. You can see here we have the stepping stones across one part of the Plover River. Here's some of that boardwalk I talked about. The Plover River itself, this is in the area that made the Backpacker Great Trail. And here's an area where we have a little bit more rustic bridge across a tributary to the Plover, because we do try as much as possible to fit into the landscape. And this particular segment is described as semi-primitive. The next area that we have is the Dells segment, and this is at Eau Claire Dells Park and then continuing south to Z. It goes through the dramatic, very dramatic rocks and things. It also has the CCC Bridge, and that is one of the more photographed parts of the Ice Age Trail right here in Marathon County. And then we have the Thornapple Creek segment that continues to the south. This area is a little bit more challenging. It goes from Thornapple Creek Road to County Highway N, and it goes under some high wires in some area. This area can get to be quite swampy, so this is an area where we have to be a little bit careful how we go out. We mow that with weed whackers instead of mowers because that's what the terrain allows us to do. And then we have the Ringel segment, and that comes across the Terminal Moraine. It starts at the Mountain Bay Trail on the south and goes up to County Highway N on the north. And this is an area that we are reimagining. It's under construction. Down here, this blue is the part that we have now closed, given over to the mountain bikers. The red here is a new trail that we opened up a year and a half ago. The circle here shows the part that we have actually started working on, and the gray dots are the area that we will continue to the north. Up here is an area that we will be building some boardwalks and bridges for this year. I know some of you in this audience got a letter that I sent out about a little more than a year ago, looking for some funding to protect some land, and we were able to purchase a narrow strip of land for permanent protection of a trail. It got it out of a landowner's driveway that we had been on by what's called a handshake agreement. Handshake agreements are places that the trail goes, but they are places where there is no legal protection, and they are very vulnerable because we may have landowners gave us an agreement in the 70s or the 80s, and maybe the original landowner has passed on for whatever reason. Maybe they've sold their property, and suddenly they say, we don't want you to put the trail on that area anymore. And in this particular area, if we had lost this particular, actually it's right in here, if we had lost this particular part of access, we would have lost 7 miles of trail, because we do not take you out and leave you in the middle of the woods. We take you from road to road. And so protecting that land was wonderful. And so thanks to a number of local people who sent in anywhere from $10 or $15 to several $100s, we were able to save that land. We'll talk more about that in a bit as well. The new trail will also, besides eliminating user conflicts, it will give people a much more positive experience. Here is an example of steps that we made as part of the project near Ringel. Here you can see us rooting out a tree. Boy, that's a dark picture, isn't it? And then we have, of course, the ultimate goal of bringing trail down all the way through here. We have recently put in a camping area in here so that people who are hiking the whole trail have a place to camp where they didn't used to have one. It's kind of not super well marked except for people who know what blazes to look for, because it's close to a road and we did not want it to become a party spot. And so we have subtle markings there, but not a lot of signage saying this is a camping area, because that's what we don't want. The Ice Age Trail also has a Saunters program. That's a program that works with kids. It started in the Wausau School District in about 2010, about the same time we built the Plover River segment. And they have 60 kids who spend a week each summer with teachers and AmeriCorps volunteers, and then they're usually about 3rd to 5th graders. And then the kids who are past that also get to come back as mentors, and they will hike 30 to 40 miles. They get grants to support buses and pay their teachers. They get out on the trail, they learn about nature, they learn about healthy lifestyles. They usually do a service project. I've gone out to work with them, and it is amazing hiking with them, and they get to, at one of our trailheads, hunters will often dump their carcasses, and they found bones from a deer skull, and so they were exploring these, the wonder that they see, the little vole that they saw out when we were hiking the trail, and I mean, I walk and I just kind of ignore those things, and these kids just wonder, and it's just great to see them doing it. So that's a wonderful program that they have. And that has been since 2008. Here you see the numbers for a year ago. I haven't updated it, and what they get to learn from it. And this has been, like I said, the Wausau School District also uses the Ice Age Trail for their summer school programs for kids that are not in Saunters. I've often been out working on the trail to have 30 or 40 kids coming through, so that's kind of a cool thing. And so our future plans are to continue finishing up the Ringel segment. We also have property that will eventually connect these two segments, get you off of the county road that you're, or not the county road, the little town road you're going through. And in the long run, getting down south of 29, it's a long, long project. A lot of the work, especially the new work, the large work, gets done on mobile skills events, and that's what we're doing down in this area. And for 2019, we have 3 planned for Marathon County. The boardwalk construction will be relatively small. We'll probably have a cap at about 30, 35 people. The local chapter will be doing some frame construction prior to that, and we will probably set up some dates for that at the meeting that we have this Saturday, because our local planning meeting is coming up this Saturday. And then in May, we will continue on in the part I showed you earlier, and in August, and the goal is to have a bunch of that new trail opened by the end of this summer. Here are some samples about the money that is needed to support these kinds of things. Puncheons, bridges, parking lots, exhibits, these all add up. And so obviously funding is a big deal. And so as individuals, we have ways to encourage people to help. One of them is distributing information, talking about the trail. Another is to volunteer and encourage volunteers. Volunteers don't have to get out and build trail. We could use help with websites, we could use help with promotion, with talking, just lots of different ways. Becoming a member and being on top of things. Becoming a sponsor, as especially businesses and organizations. And another project they have that might be appropriate for some of the folks in this room is including the Ice Age Trail in your estate planning, in your wills. They have programs where if you have a house that you own and you want to live in and you don't have heirs that are going to want that, you can set up an annuity, get a regular annuity, and they get some money from the way that works. I don't understand all the finances behind it, but they have ways to do that kind of thing. And here are some of the sponsorship opportunities for organizations and some of the ways that they thank them for that. And then I am glad to answer questions. I do have another slideshow that I'm not going to bore you with unless you want it, and that is a few highlights from when I hiked the trail a few years ago. So let's open it up for questions. Yes?
Were there really mammoths around here?
The mammoths were back at the time of the Ice Age. They have found some skeletons in southern Wisconsin. Yes? That is through the schools. They usually end up with a waiting list. I think Miranda has been doing that, I think since the start, and she says that she usually ends up with her 60 kids plus another 60 on the waiting list. It's very popular. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Just a clarification. If I want to hike certain sections of this and I go to that website, are there maps that I can take and if I go out by myself? You know, I don't want to get lost.
Mm-hmm. It's the maps on the website have a lot of the information. They don't have all of the detailed information. The real detailed information is available in resources that are available for purchase, which includes the ones I have samples for outside. Many of the local chapters will have maps, and I have our local ones outside. It varies a little bit, but the details do it's kind of like we want to encourage you to come out, but we don't want to totally give away the store. You know, the itineraries are a good way to get some of the samplings, and then people kind of get hooked on it. The Mammoth Tracks puts it all on an iPhone, and there is also a, it's called a data book that you can download that gives specific information in other ways that has, they're not huge prices, but there are, you know, charges to them.
Is there one publication that you can buy that would cover the whole state?
Yes, the guidebook covers the whole state. For the trail sections, it does not cover the road connectors. The atlas covers the trail sections and the selected road sections. The data booking covers the whole state. And the Mammoth Tracks app, I think it has 3 separate parts that cover different parts of the state. Yes.
Thank you, Gail. I want you to say how, as a volunteer at the work things, and I've maintained a section over by Ringo since 2003. As a volunteer, I want, what impressed me in working on the work crew is how very exacting the trails, when we're making trails, we have to dig out things, and we have to dig out sections and bring in soil. I mean, it's really, tell me these trails are constructed to last. It's not just, you know, cutting a trail through the woods. I mean, it's pretty exacting.
You're absolutely right, Nancy, and I want to commend Nancy here. She is one of our trail maintainers. She has just addressed another part of the volunteering that I kind of skimmed over in my talk. That is that we have a couple dozen people who get out, and they're called segment adopters or section maintainers, that get out and mow 2 or 3 times a year on these various sections to cut back the brush and things like that. You heard Melanie talk this morning about how things overgrow, and that's a trade-off in how many volunteers are out to get out and do it. And Nancy's been volunteering for many years, and she's right. When we do that's one of the big differences in the trail standards from the 70s, when we took the logging roads and whatever we could find, and the current trail that we build now. We build a trail that is compacted. We get down to mineral soil so that it will stand up. We build trail that is what we call hydrologically invisible, which means that instead of going up and down over a hill so that the water comes down it and makes a gully, we cut around the edges of it. It might be a trail that is kind of sloped like this when you're starting, and as we are going, we will cut it out so that it's more like this. It's not quite flat. We aim for about a 5-degree slope so that it feels flat to your feet and ankles, but the water runs off of it. And we blend in the back so that when the water sheets down, it will continue to sheet across rather than puddling and building a hole on the trail. And that's a big part of the reason that we don't want to be sharing our trails with bicycles and horses and other elements that compact the soil differently, that press it down and cause what's called berming, where it builds up an edge and then it starts to hold water. And so one of our maintenance issues is periodically, especially on a steeply sloped trail, to go out and deberm it, take that little edge off, so that when it's coming down like this, it continues to come down instead of all of a sudden going like that. Thank you, Nancy. Other comments, other questions? Okay, then I guess my question to you becomes, have you had enough, or would you like to see just a very quick skip through of my personal experience with the trail? It's your business. Let's go hiking? Okay, do we have someone back there to change my PowerPoints? Wonderful. Okay, we'll start right here. I am a section hiker. I hiked day hikes, a series of them over a period of slightly more than 2 years. And this is my story between 2012 and 2014. Ice Age Trail, we talked about that. These are some examples of some of the vintage or legacy things on the trail. Some of the older signs, an old bridge in an area, some things that are kind of worn out. And I started out when I lived in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. I had hiked a little bit of the trail in the 70s at Hartman Creek Park near Wapaka. And then I lived in Rice Lake and got out and did some snowshoeing and decided that this was a pretty cool place. And I was at a point in my life where I could start to volunteer a little bit. So I did. And here are showing some of the early projects. Here we are. This is our first meeting for the Plover River segment. You can see it's pretty thick there. Here are some other areas, working in areas. And so I was getting to meet people and finding out people that I liked. And so I started volunteering, started building, and took crew leader skills training where I learned how to lead volunteers. Because when we have these mobile skill projects, you have volunteer leaders who know how to lead volunteers and who know the standards. And so you're not going out there, here, fend for yourself. You've got somebody there who teaches you to do what you need to do. And so I started doing that. And of course, on those projects, you run into a lot of hikers. And so I was working and taking vacation and volunteering and shooting off my mouth, oh, when I retire, I'm going to hike the Ice Age Trail. It was a long ways away. I didn't have to worry about it. A couple years later, my position was cut. I retired earlier than expected. Got my pension in order, and it was the end of May. Oh my gosh, it was the first weekend of June. The first Saturday of June is National Trails Day. I said, when I retire, I'm going to hike the Ice Age Trail. I guess I'm retired, maybe I should start. So I did. I went down and took my dog and got some parts of the trail that I did, and I took my maps and my guidebooks and, oops, get that back. These are samples of what the map looks like. It has the road connectors and the trail in different parts, and at that time the guidebook listed this, and so I highlighted the areas that I did and put a date with them. And then I continued on. I made a spreadsheet, and I listed all the segments, and I put in, this is how long it is, when I did it, who I did it with. One of the resources on the web page is they have the questionnaire that you have to fill out to get official recognition for hiking the trail. So I downloaded that and saw what kinds of questions they would ask, because then I knew what kind of information to keep. So I did that. And here is the start and the finish. My first hike was at the Cross Plains headquarters. This mammoth is out in front of their headquarters. That's where the Alliance staff works, is in Cross Plains, Wisconsin, which is on Highway 14, a little bit west of Madison. It is in the Driftless area. And this is the group that I finished with in the Kettle Moraine about a little more than 2 years later. Here are the termini. This one is in Potawatomi State Park. There's a rock there. And here is in St. Croix Falls, where I finished up, and I hiked that with my son. And here are many of the people that I hiked with during the course of the trail. I think when I counted them up, I hiked with more than 40 different people in groups of not more than half a dozen. I did not have a built-in support person. My husband does not drive, and so I needed to connect with other people in order to avoid doing everything twice or doing everything on a bicycle. Because when you're section hiking, the logistics are far more complicated than when you're doing a through hike from one end to the other. And so I connected with that Facebook page, I connected with other hikers, and these are the folks that I hiked with during the course of that hike. And I had memorable moments. This is the day that Jared fell headfirst in the Beaver Dam. There was a beaver dam up in western Lincoln County. It was an abandoned dam, and there were 3 of us out hiking. I was hiking with Jared, and Todd was hiking from the other way, and we ran into Jim, who was on his second pass of the trail that day, and they both said, watch out for the beaver dam, there's a big hole in it, and they had a log at the bottom. There's about a 5-foot drop from the top of the dam, which is starting to deteriorate, to where this drop was. Well, Jared is over 6 feet tall, and he jumped across it, no problem. I'm not 6 feet tall. So I was getting ready to sit down, put my feet on the log, and go through, and he was a gentleman who reached back to take my hand, and it gave way, and he ended head first on the bottom of that log. I screamed, and that woke him up. He wiped the dirt off his face before I was able to take the picture, but then we contacted the Alliance, and they built a bridge across it within a few days. This is the day Will finished. I hiked with him. Downpour. We were soaked through to the skin on the final day of his hike. It was in the Chequamegon, just a couple days before the first of the government shutdowns that has happened in recent years. Here are heading out in different folks. Holly was down on this one. She had been working for forever to finish the Janesville segment, going around there's a big U at the bottom of the trail down in Janesville. And she wanted, many of the chapters have chapter hiking awards, and she had that one segment to finish to get her chapter hiking award. And so we finished up that day in a really, really wicked wind, but she was just so happy, and so that was really cool. And this was on my very first day. It was during the annual conference in Cross Plains, and this was on a group hike. It was one of the few group hikes that I counted towards my total. And this is one of the Alliance staff members who was leading that hike, and his son Gus was there, and that little boy looking up at his dad, not that far from their house. It's, the memorable moments, the really cool things you say. This is my friend Ruth. She was hiking with her dog Chester, who was about 14 at the time, and Chester was used to hiking, but Chester had arthritis in his foot, and so periodically she would stop and massage his foot so he could continue hiking. And so that was just really cool. And then, of course, a couple years ago when Chester died, I sent her a copy of that picture because that was just such a good one. Here was one of my first times hiking on the trail when I was first starting to volunteer. A former chapter coordinator and another volunteer locally who was an Appalachian Trail hiker, and I kind of invited myself along to go with them when they were hiking up in the Chequamegon, and so that was one of my first days. The day I hiked in a blizzard over by Sheboygan. The only time I followed a road walk that was different than the recommended one, I made a wrong turn, and in any other weather I'd have turned around and gone back, but that day I found an alternate route because I wasn't going to be backtracking. The dusk, the evening, just the beautiful. This is up in Langlade County, a few days before deer hunting, and it's just the peace, the wonder of being out there. The various seasons. One of my early pictures is this one. This was taken up in Rusk County before I moved to Wausau, when I was first starting to volunteer a late winter snowshoe hike. The colors, the gorgeous colors of spring, not as obvious as in the fall, but every bit as gorgeous. Landmarks along the trail. This is out on the Plover River segment. This is up in Langlade County. It's a place called the Hillbilly Hilton. It is on a logging road. It is an area that someone has cleared it out, and they've got a little cot in there. It is, leave no trace, leave it as good as you found it. It's kind of dank, kind of buggy, like living in a dugout, but there are times when it's really rainy that it's pretty good to get there. I happened to hike that right before deer hunting, and as you can see, someone has settled in. It was obviously someone's deer camp. So I did not go and look inside of it that day. I did later when I hiked with a friend. Last October, we were building trail in Langlade County, and the MSC people were camping, and it was snowing. It was a very snowy, rainy area. A couple of hikers were coming through, and they said, we stayed in the Hillbilly Hilton. Luxurious accommodations compared to the tents that some of those trail builders are staying in. But that's one of the cool things. This is either a WCC or CC down in Waupaca County along the Waupaca River. Another open spot, campers can stop there. Since I did Langlade County during deer camp, there was an extra camper out there. One of the hunters was out there. And these are the signs of a dispersed camping area, which we are building more of in order to give long-distance hikers a legal place to set up and leave no trace hiking. Here are some more landmarks. I know Melody came through a few of them. Probably one of the fanciest blinds I ever saw on private property up in Polk County. Notice there's even a propane tank there. The Dam Bar down in Belleville, next to the trail. This is down near Cross Plains on a segment. Mailboxes. This we thought, this was along, I think, the Sugar River. It was one of the few areas that we overlap with a bicycle trail. But it was kind of all these really cool things, and hikers will talk about them because they remember them. Bridges, this is down in Portage, Wisconsin, where you're going through on the road. This is different ones, this is in Mishicot, I believe. Different bridges along the trail. The penstocks before they were replaced, and other tunnels. This one is in Kewaunee County, and one of them, this is it. This one actually goes under the I-39 bridge. South of Watoma, there is a wayside. And if you go on the southbound wayside on your way to Madison, there are Ice Age Trail signs. That is actually a connector to the Ice Age Trail. It is right at the north end of that bifurcation that Melanie talked about this morning. And this is the tunnel under the freeway that your Ice Age Trail actually goes through the medium and comes out on the other side of the freeway. And it tends to get a little wet at times. Various landscapes. One of the things I will tell you is that as a section hiker, you have the ability to pick and choose what time of year you do which trails. I did many of the road connectors in the winter or the early spring when the trails tend to be messy. When the roads are more comfortable, you don't have the sun beating down on you the same as you do in the hot summer. And it was a wonderful time to see the landscapes because you did not have the trees blocking your leaves. And here are some of the things you see on the connectors: cutouts, landscaping, chickens and cows. A little bit more connectors, the farms, an old barn, the Niagara Escarpment, sprinklers, and critters. Here we have, I never realized how big beavers are. I watched that. He must have slapped at me about 6 or 7 times. I was going through an area up in Rusk County in the Blue Hills where the trail is kind of primitive. And I was actually doing something on an MSC project that they don't let you do very often. They're very big on the safety net, so they don't let you out there alone a whole lot. You've got to be with someone. But by this time, I was pretty well established. I was finishing up my hike, and it's like, I'm finishing up next week. If I can do it as part of this project, great. But if not, I will have to play hooky from the project because I'm getting this done. I'm finishing next week when my sister from out of state is back. So they gave me a topo map and told me to go out and hike the trail and scope out which of the ATV trails that we were crossing were still in use and which weren't, which of the areas were open to get a mower into, and where did they have to send out sawyers first to get rid of trees that were down so that they could get mowers in, that kind of things. And I encountered several beaver dams that we didn't know were there, and so this was one of those areas, and so I was looking for where to find the trail as the beaver came through, and I couldn't believe how huge those things were. It was a day later, I was hiking in another area, and I was singing and hiking along, and all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I sang loudly and badly and gave it plenty of space, and it moved on. Fungi, just gorgeous. Flowers. I didn't know my spring flowers when I started hiking and volunteering for the Ice Age Trail. Now I can lead wildflower hikes. Challenges. Told you about those blizzards. Tall grass. This is that grassy lake area that Melanie may have mentioned. One of the areas we got turned around. You can see how it is. My friend here, Tess, is short. She's shorter than I am, but you can still see. Storms coming in, wind, bugs. She talks about the ticks. I use lots of permethrin. There are several areas where you need to ford streams. Hardest part for me was probably one of the first parts I did down at Devil's Lake. Had to go up the Balance Rock Trail. I'm glad I was going up because I'd never made it going down. I don't know how many times I would have turned around, except I want to be a 1,000-miler, and that means I have to do this blankety-blank thing, and so I did. Also, it seems nailed signs come down. There is something about putting a blaze on a tree makes it beaver bait. They must love yellow paint. So that's it. Thank you so much.